Okay, we are now streaming. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm so delighted to learn that we've got near perfect attendance for this, our second to last meeting of the task force. And it's perhaps the most important meeting we will have yet. Last week, we continued our discussion on the funding strategy for the Transformational Mobility Network with a focus on funding sources to answer the question, can we really afford a bold transformational mobility network, and can we fund it? The key question was, can we fund it? My answer, and I think your answer, is yes, we can. Now the question tonight is, what do we recommend as a task force? Tonight, I want us to engage in a discussion, hopefully a robust discussion, around the recommendations that we're going to make to Mayor Lyles and the City Council. I look forward to hearing from all of you and encourage each of you to freely share your perspective, opinion, and your passion. I want your voices to shape our recommendation. I want to say that again. I want your voices to shape our recommendation. And prior to coming over here, I received 2 emails from 2 task force members who didn't even know what the agenda was tonight, but they shared freely their feelings on this task force, and I hope they will reinforce those feelings in the discussion we're going to have tonight. I fully expect to hear differing and competing views, and I encourage you to do so, or to at least freely give your views so that we can have a lively dialogue, or as lively as we can get in this virtual setting. Yet remember, all of this is we have one goal in mind, which is to provide to the mayor and the city council a clear set of actionable recommendations to shape Charlotte's mobility future. As always, I'm going to remind the task force that you have a digital raise your hand button that you can use to participate in the conversation. I confess to being a little bit awkward with that, but I'm hoping the staff will help me so that we can be responsive to the order of people who want to make comments tonight, because it's so important. So I know the staff is here prepared to do their very best, and I want everyone to believe and know that they can chime in. I want to hear from you. Before we get to the recommendation discussions, however, I'm going to hand this off to Taiwo to introduce our next item on the agenda. Ty?
Thank you, Mayor. Appreciate that. Good evening, everyone. I know we're going to get into the conversation around our recommendations, and that's very important. But I also wanted to give us an opportunity to listen to one of our regional partners with regards to the work that they're doing. If you will recall, back in, I believe, August or so, one of our task force members, Geraldine, who is the executive director of Central Liner Regional Council, presented to us the work they're doing on Beyond 77. While the focus of our work has been on Charlotte and Mecklenburg County, it's also very important to constantly make that connection to what happens beyond our county, and that is multi-jurisdiction. And so Bob Cook is the director of the Charlotte Regional Transportation Organization, which really oversees transportation programming in Mecklenburg County, in Iredell, and part of Union County. And they are embarking on their metropolitan planning, transportation planning effort for 2050. And he will just spend the next 10 to 15 minutes sharing with us where they are with that work and how that connects with the work we're doing in terms of network, but also how they typically program their transportation funding. So Bob, I'll turn it over to you, and I believe that Ed will be running the slides for you.
Great. All right. Well, thank you, Ty. And thank you, Mayor Ganton, members of the task force for a few minutes tonight to provide some information about the CRTPO's efforts to prepare our 2050 Metropolitan Transportation Plan. Next. These are the items that I want to touch on tonight to provide you with a brief overview of the CRTPO for those of you not familiar with the organization, to talk a little bit about the MTP and its basics, and then to get into a few more details about it, some of its components, the goals and objectives, financial projections, scenario planning, and other regional initiatives. Next. So for those of you who aren't familiar with CRTPO, we are the federally designated metropolitan planning organization for the Charlotte urbanized area. And like any MPO in the country, and there are about 400 sister organizations throughout the United States, we are primarily responsible for allocating federal funds to projects and programs. That's really the core, one of the core functions of an MPO, no matter where it's located. So you can see our planning area there on the right that Ty mentioned earlier, Iredell, Mecklenburg, and most of Union County, at least where most of the people in Union County live. It's about 1,560 square miles, a population of about 1.4 million people. We have 21 cities and towns who are voting members of the organization, along with the 3 counties depicted there. And the North Carolina Board of Transportation and the Metropolitan Transit Commission are also members, voting members of the CRTPO. And next. So the MTP has a lot of components, but here are just a few that I wanted to touch on. Its most basic role is that it's our long-range plan. We update it every 4 years. It has to be financially feasible. It is not a wish list. We have to be able to establish that we'll have the funds available to cover all the projects, and it establishes our priorities as a region for the next 20 plus years. And so I'll go back to that updated every 4 years, because that's not just a regulatory component of the plan. It's pretty significant because it's recognized that our region is dynamic, it's growing. And so to have a long-range plan in effect for a very long period of time just isn't realistic. We have to update this every 4 years for a number of reasons, but most importantly, because it's the smart thing to do. Again, particularly in a growing region like ours. And next. So I just wanted to briefly touch on the schedule so you'll get a feel for the scope of this effort. We started work on the MTP this summer, and this September we hit a milestone with establishment of our advisory committee. And as you can see, 2021 will be largely devoted to the plan development. So it'll be the staff and our partners. And if you look at the lower right of the screen, our goal is to complete the plan and have it adopted by our board in March of 2022. So there's a lot of activities going on. These are some of the highlights you see there. It'll be quite an undertaking for us in the environment we're currently in, but we're confident about making that March 2022 deadline. Next. There's been a lot happening since last summer, and we're getting serious this fall about a number of the plan's components. We've been working on the plan's goals and objectives, which I'll address a bit more in a moment. The same about the financial plan and its assumptions. We'll hold a virtual kickoff next month, and I'll provide some details about that near the close of my presentation. We've begun looking at potential changes to our roadway ranking methodology. I'll talk briefly about scenario planning in a later slide, and we will be opening a call for candidate projects early next year. And next. The goals and objectives are an important part of the plan's development because they set the tone not only for the plan, but for the organization as a whole. We've spent a considerable amount of time this time around on our goals and objectives to make them more achievable and realistic. In the past, there was a lot of lovely language in our goals and objectives, but oftentimes they were related to matters over which we had very little control. We think they're now a lot more realistic. And next. And I wanted to highlight this. Our policy board is actually meeting as we speak. And one of the items on their agenda tonight is to approve the start of a comment period on our goals and objectives. And if they act to do so, that comment period will start tomorrow, the 19th, or yes, that's tomorrow, the 19th, and go through the end of the year, December 31st. So I hope all of you will be able to take a few minutes to review them once they're posted on our website. I'll provide that information shortly, and you can provide your thoughts. It'd be great to have feedback from well-informed members of the public. Next. So let me get into the financial element a little bit here. As I mentioned earlier, the plan's financial component is one of its most significant. It is required by the Federal Highway Administration. It covers all modes, and most important, we again must be able to demonstrate that we'll have the funds required to build all the projects contained in the plan, not to mention maintain existing facilities. There are components associated with all modes. We're responsible, along with NCDOT, for roadway funding forecasting, and we rely upon CATs for transit forecasts. We also have to prepare forecasts for maintaining the system, along with those needed for our discretionary funds. Those are funds that we receive directly from the federal government for allocation to projects. Next. Local funding is very much a part of an MPO's financial plan, and with an initiative as significant as the Charlotte Moves Task Force, we will certainly be working with the city to determine how its recommendations are incorporated into the MTP. So it'll be an ongoing activity as you progress into your next phases, and we'll be sure to have interaction with staff on that front. I do want to note also that the financial plan will be challenging due to NCDOT's financial difficulties, in that we'll have to figure out how that situation long term. And when we were doing this 4 years ago, current plan, everything was very rosy. We were adding projects left and right, or so it seemed. And it's a much different time this time. So one thing I also wanted to mention is that our board tonight is also being asked to tell us how it views looking at alternative funding sources to fill any gaps that are identified. We know that we always have more projects submitted for potential inclusion in the plan than we know we'll have money for. So we're going to ask them to see what their thoughts on looking at alternatives to see what we need to do to fill some of those gaps. Next. This is probably one of the more exciting components, at least from my perspective, as a part of the plan development this time around. We're expanding significantly from what we did in preparing the current plan when it comes to scenario planning. We're evaluating what-if scenarios related to potential changes associated with technology, specifically in the area of connected and autonomous vehicles, growth and development patterns, and work from home trends, particularly important now that we're in the midst of the pandemic and we might be experiencing a pretty significant shift in how people work and where they work. We're doing this because we want local staff and officials to be informed about the potential effects and the outcomes of these possible changes. Plus, we want them to be informed before transportation improvement projects are submitted next month as a part of the plan development process. Our policy board is going to be holding a special meeting next month to review the outcomes of the scenario planning exercise. And at that time, they're going to be asked to provide us with direction on how to proceed on this front. Next. When any MPO prepares its long-range plan, it needs to make sure that it does so in collaboration with other initiatives. And as you can see on the screen here, that we have no shortage of such initiatives in this region. CRTPO has been working on many of these initiatives already. In fact, Beyond 77 is our own project, and we'll continue to do so as plan preparation continues. So we'll have continued interaction, I should say, with the Charlotte Moves Task Force and the other initiatives that you see there. It's it's fortunate that we have good relationships with all the organizations and the agencies that are involved in those, the initiatives you see there. Next, please. This is our project website, 2050mtp.org. I encourage you to go to visit the website to get more information about the MTP. And it's a great way to stay updated on the plan's progress. And I want to take this opportunity to thank Judy Dellard O'Keefe of our staff for all the work she put into making it a reality. We had a little bit of a hiccup in the process, and she worked hard to make sure this got up and running in time for our upcoming kickoff. Next. And speaking of that kickoff, I wanted to give you a few details about that. As you can see on the calendar there, it'll be held on Thursday, December 17th at 4 p.m. and I hope you'll be able to join in. I'll be sure to make sure that you are included on the invites with the necessary links to access the meeting. By the way, the task force will be well represented. I'm very happy that Eric Zavro will play a role as a panelist along with Tony Lathrop and David Howard. And that panel will be actually moderated by Geraldine Gardner. So if nothing else, I'm sure they won't let us on CRTPO staff forget about how to make sure that Charlotte Moves is part of our process. And next. And with that, I wanted to wrap up here with a video that we prepared, a promotional video that I think really sums up what the MTP is all about and ways in which every resident in our community can get involved in the process. So I'll allow that to get started. Takes about 3 minutes, I believe.
What will our transportation system look like in 2050? New and emerging technologies, like self-driving vehicles and connected vehicles, are expanding mobility options and starting to change how we travel. With so much going on in our everyday lives, thinking about the future may seem difficult. But to get to the future we want, we must start planning and preparing today. Recent world events show us how important it is to be ready for change and to plan and be prepared for shifting trends and realities. The Charlotte Regional Transportation Planning Organization, or CRTPO, is spearheading this effort in the Charlotte region of Iredell, Mecklenburg, and Union counties. This is accomplished through an update of its Metropolitan Transportation Plan, or MTP.
The MTP is a plan that documents the vision for our future and establishes the objectives, goals, and transportation priorities through 2050 to help us realize that vision. The plan considers all modes of transportation, while also considering the impacts to the environment, the economy, public health, and the overall quality of life for everyone.
The plan identifies funding for these projects, as well as prioritizing how that funding is spent.
We need your help to establish a vision for our future transportation system, to identify needed projects, and to hold us accountable for monitoring our progress.
We need your help to establish a vision for our future transportation system, to identify the projects that are necessary, and to hold us accountable to ensure that we're meeting our goals and objectives for this plan.
There are opportunities to provide input throughout the development of the MTP. Please visit our website to learn all the ways you can share input with us. We can't wait to hear from you.
Goals and objectives provide a framework for the region's transportation strategies and priorities and guide development of the Metropolitan Transportation Plan. Effective goals and objectives are measurable, so we can monitor if we're moving in the right direction. When developing goals and objectives, it's important to understand what people who live and work in our region want.
As a working mother, having a reliable commute would be a huge benefit. Less time in traffic would mean more quality time with my family.
I'd love to ride to work, where I buy my groceries and other amenities, or even a park or greenway in our community.
I rely on transit because I don't have a car, but it doesn't always go the places I need it to go, and it's not always on time, so I spend a long time waiting.
Making roadway improvements so I can make deliveries on time would be a huge benefit, not only for me, but for the people I serve.
Do these priorities align with your vision? Are there priorities that we haven't included? And what projects accomplish the goals and objectives that are most important to you?
We're here to listen to you. We want to make your participation as convenient and safe as possible. we're developing web and virtual technologies for public engagement. Visit our website to review and comment on draft goals and objectives, explore potential projects, and comment on the ones that matter to you.
So that's the promotional video. I hope you liked it as much as I did. I think the folks who worked on it did a terrific job. I'm very proud of it, and I'll be happy to answer any if there are time.
Thank you very much, Bob. I appreciate that. And I will share this with every member of the task force, so they will be able to reach out to you as well. But thank you. That video piece just summarizes a lot of what we're here for: multimodal in nature, meeting people's needs where they are, and really helping to transform our future. So thank you very much, Bob. I'll turn it back over to Mayor Gant for what's next. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bob, also. I want to spend the bulk of our remaining time tonight in this conversation I shared with you at the initiating of this meeting. We want to discuss and debate and share perspectives on how to shape our recommendations to the mayor and to the city council. To organize and facilitate this conversation, Stephen will summarize the great work we have already accomplished in the 8 or so meetings that we've had, and will lead us in a discussion focused on concluding our work in a set of recommendations to Mayor Lyles and to the City Council. Stephen, why don't you take it away?
Thank you, Mayor. It's a pleasure to be here again tonight, and it's hard to believe that we're reaching a conclusion in our work. We're not quite there yet. We've got a lot to discuss tonight. But one of the things we clearly need to talk about this evening is how do we wrap up this task force, and what is it that we find agreement on, and what is the messaging with which we know is important to share with the mayor and council as we conclude our work together. I thought some of the words that Bob Cook shared with us tonight are both sobering and timely. He referenced some of the financial challenges that our state is experiencing. I think that just predicates an importance of what we're doing right now. And it probably also is a shared experience that many state governments are encountering at this moment of time. And I think it speaks likewise to why so many of our peer communities have sought some financial independence for the implementation of their plans. Places like Nashville and Denver and Austin and Seattle, it's no mistake that our peers have figured out that in order to control their destinies, they're going to need to find the means with which to advance their plans as they align with their community needs and priorities. So one of the things that we shared with you a few weeks ago was somewhat a glimpse into how we might conclude this task force work. In other words, how would we summarize it? And I think there was some discussion about, do we send a letter? Do we write a memo? Is there a report? And I think we wanted to be clear about what you should expect from us. We've been trying to take copious notes throughout this process and ensure that we're capturing all the meaningful dialogue. And we feel like it needs to be more than simply a memorandum. So I hope that you'll be pleased to hear that our commitment to you is to encapsulate the good work of this task force into a deliverable that is a report in format, albeit brief, clear, and direct, but a report nonetheless. And with your help tonight, our goal is to have a draft of that complete prior to Thanksgiving. So as you can imagine, we've got a lot of work in front of us as a team supporting the task force, but we're up for the challenge, and we appreciate the trust you've placed in us. So when we think about what that report might look like, I think one of the things that's pretty clear is that we don't need to make this more complicated than it actually is. We've been given a fairly clear directive from Mayor Lyles about what our charge and responsibilities are. And after examining our notes and discussion from past meetings, it became fairly clear that we simply need to address the three main questions that are always important, which is why? Why do we even need a task force at this moment in time? Why is this work important to Charlotte and Charlotte's future moving forward? And second, to follow that is, what would be our response to the things that we've learned about that why. If we know that the challenges are increasing in our community, our challenges are changing, then we need a transportation response to those challenges. And that could be our what. And then finally, we've got to demonstrate that, similar to what Bob was saying, it's not just a wish list, that we can reasonably demonstrate that we can afford to invest in a transformational mobility network as an infrastructure program so that we can take the work of the task force and operationalize it. So with your permission, we're going to continue to follow an organization of a report around those three themes. But let's kind of take a little bit of time to maybe explore the next kind of a little bit of reflection on where we've been thus far. And it's kind of hard to believe. I was looking back through notes and I couldn't believe where we started. It's been almost 8 months. It's been 8 months since we started this journey together. And it's led to some research. We've talked with peer communities. They've been guests. We've had dialogue with them. We've had collaboration and even some dialogue that had a full spectrum of ranges, from regional to local, from equity to mobility, and everything in between, because it's all interrelated. And so for tonight, our efforts clearly probably should focus on what are our recommendations, as opposed to kind of revisiting that work of the past. While we're certainly interested in continuing the dialogue, we really want to spend the remainder of our time together focused on what it is that's most important that we capture at these final stages within those recommendations. And we're going to help with that tonight, but we can't do it for you. Obviously, we want to be sure that we're accurately representing what's on your minds, not just as a collective task force, but also as individuals. And I think that's important. And with your help here again, we'll find ways to do that. Let's take a look at the next slide. So I'm going to break down each of the whys just as an introduction, and how I'd like for this to work this evening. Just as Mayor Gant suggested, we'd love to get as much input and participation tonight as possible. I think you should expect that tonight's meeting is different. We've been spending so much of our agenda and past meetings on delivering new information to you. We've got a small amount of new information tonight, but the bulk of this should be about hearing from you and having you respond to some of the things that we've organized under each of these. So let's go ahead and take a look at the why. And I'm not going to revisit the state of mobility as a report. I know you've all had the opportunity to study it. You know the trends. All of those trends that were captured in there ranged anything from transportation indicators to inequities, both documented by demographics as well as geographies in our community. We've had discussions about where we rank in terms of access to opportunity and upward mobility. We know we're 50th out of 50 large cities in the US. It's not a place we like to be. We also know from a travel perspective, we're still wed to our cars. Despite all our best efforts, we know that we haven't completed our system sufficient to see the mode share shift that we would like to see in a way that's supportive of both our local economy as well as our quality of place. And then lastly, we've explored, if we were to make a transportation response, what would that look like? And you guys know the answer to that. It's the Transformational Mobility Network. We've calibrated that with you. And we also know that this wasn't about identifying new projects as much as it was mining the projects that are in our existing plans that have yet to be funded and implemented. And we know that when we do that, good things happen. The last meeting I shared with you, to the best of our ability, some of the outcomes that we were projecting would occur if we were to implement the Transformational Mobility Network in its entirety. And these are no small things. When we just looked at jobs and housing, for example, we know that we're going to be in the path of 90% of Charlotte's future jobs within a half mile of the Transformational Mobility Network. We also know that 68% of our future housing is likely to fall within a half mile of that network. What that tells us is that the network itself is well placed geographically. There's a reason why these projects show up in our existing plans, and they're worthy of our attention. So with that in mind, the affirmation here is that we all agree that the information that's contained within this report, the dialogue, the research that we've had, should lead us to a conclusion that one of the things that we have as a tool in our arsenal to respond to these changing needs is transportation. And so we're thinking in terms of recommendations to council that one of the things that we need to articulate up front is a clear objective for endorsing the transformational mobility network. The network itself is important enough for us to acknowledge that it is our response to our changing and increasing needs. Following that is, if we're going to make that investment, we should expect some changes in how we travel, certainly for the increment of growth that occurs in our community. And for that reason, we believe that establishing a mode share target, which has been brought up by several task force members, is an important metric. It's something that says that we're going to make a commitment, not just to building things, but a commitment to ensuring that we bring alignment between the variety of initiatives in our community, some of the desired outcomes that we've placed in other plans. I'll give you an example. Without achieving some of our mode share objectives, we're not likely to achieve the goals that are stated in our Strategic Energy Action Plan. That deals with the environment. We're also not likely to achieve the ability to implement the 10-minute neighborhoods that's described in our most recently developed Charlotte Futures 2040 comprehensive plan. And we know that if we don't begin to realize the relationship between our transportation investments and how we connect people to opportunity, we're going to continue to be 50th on that list of upward mobility. Not a place where we want to be. And lastly, it goes without saying, but we'd love to see a formal endorsement of a plan that memorializes not just the list of projects, but the policies and the mechanisms with which we prioritize, the mechanisms with which we design, and the mechanisms with which we partner to build our transportation system. And that would come through the adoption of a strategic mobility plan that would immediately follow the conclusion of the task force work. So I've thrown a few things up against the wall here as just some fodder for conversation. I want to be very clear. These are not my recommendations. These are things that we've been mining through the notes as we've listened to the dialogue over the last 8 months that have risen to the occasion when we think about ways with which to recommend the why portion of the report. And so I'd like to pause now, Mayor, with your permission, and maybe if we could turn to the task force members and see how you might react to that A, B, and C of endorse, identify, and adopt simply as a response to the question of the why this is important. If there's anything additional that we should be articulating or appending to those messages, we'd love to hear that. And Ed's going to help us keep notes so that we can capture this and incorporate it into the report.
All right, here's your chance for center stage. Let's talk a little bit about the why aspect of this. Why are we doing this? Why are we talking about investing in mobility as a response to our changing needs? And we're going to try to record the comments that come through in some reasonable shape. And I applaud the fact that staff wants to make sure that they are picking up the themes of 24 citizens who've been involved in this thing for the last 8 months. So if we can get an order of people who want to at least begin to participate, and let's just focus on why we're doing this, what we're doing, and why are we endorsing this transformational mobility network.
I'd even take an affirmation that we've got it right, that we're in agreement with endorsing the network and identifying a mode share target and asking council to adopt a strategic mobility plan.
I had some folks who sent me some emails today. They might want to kick this off, but let's hear from the group. Or do you understand? I'm sure you do understand what we've said up to this point. So,
well, I can certainly call out a few names. I've had names written down next to comments that we've received, but Eric, I see you up there on screen, and I would hope that one of the things that you might be pleased with, because I know that you repeated this more than once during our task force meetings, was the idea of formally identifying a mode share goal or target for Charlotte. Do you want to articulate why you believe that that's important, or is that still something that you believe is important?
Sure, Stephen. I believe it's very important to have solid, measurements as we progress. Otherwise, we're just going to be, wondering where we are and wondering how all of this is going to work going forward. And it's a major piece of, accountability for everybody, just to see, where we're going, where we've been. So I fully support setting a mode share target like that, as well as, seeing how we, like you mentioned, the upward mobility, economic upward mobility, I think is also very important to see us progress up that from the 50th on the list and move up that list is also another goal. And I really appreciate seeing that in there as well. The only other things I would add is, I absolutely agree that we need to endorse that, the transformational network. Obviously, without that, there's nothing there. That needs to absolutely be there. And also, I also agree with adopting the strategic mobility plan is how we start moving. The only other thing I would like to see, and I think I mentioned this before, is maybe just, and I know some other cities have done this as well, establishing a community advisory committee to guide throughout that process of the strategic mobility plan. And also some sort of, accountability, whether that committee rolls into some sort of role as it progresses. I know Seattle has that for their Seattle Moves. They continuously meet. There's representatives from the community and the city working together to make sure that projects stay on course, or budgeting needs to be adjusted, especially after a year like this. I saw they adjusted some of their projects and budgets because of COVID. So I think that's also required and should be in that recommendation.
That's great. Thank you, Eric. I will say this, the why is not a controversial subject. And so I don't want to belabor the topic. If there's others that would like to comment on things that they'd like to see captured, I do want to make a commitment that we plan on pulling out some of the highlights from the state of mobility, coupled with the statements that we're hearing tonight.
all right, Janet.
Thank you, Mayor. It's good to see everybody virtually this evening. I just, Stephen, I think to your comment and question about the why, I think the why is pretty obvious and very sound. And I don't think that anyone would question the need to continue investing in transportation or infrastructure, or what we're looking at. I think the steps that you've outlined for us tonight look great. I wanted to add and build on what Eric was saying. I do think that there's a need for continued engagement that represents, citizens and businesses and, users of the system. So I just wanted to build on what Eric was saying. I think whatever that process looks like throughout will be critical to, engaging the community support eventually when there's an ask and a vote for this. So thank you for all the work. It's been a pleasure to be part of this. Look forward to bringing this recommendation forward.
And Janet, just to confirm, I'm clearly hearing that we need to communicate with the community about why this is important and how this is responding to some of the things that they might be experiencing and things that they care about. But are you also kind of echoing what Eric is saying, that there be some continued engagement in the midst of actually implementing? Say there's an approval of, but when we get into the actual implementation, that there needs to be some regular dialogue and a method with which to connect with the community.
Yeah, Stephen, that is what I'm saying. And I don't think it needs to be to the point where things will change the planning or the implementation of it. But I think that keeping, the why in front of the community, again, as you get to a point of having to engage the community on a vote towards this, I think it's really important that that communication loop be an active one. And that could take place through social media, of course, but I think having some sort of regular engagement throughout neighborhoods and through businesses and outreach will be important.
It's great. Thank you.
William Hughes. Thanks.
Yes, thank you. So I'm just kind of echoing some of what Eric and Janet have previously mentioned, but I think particularly in the areas of equity as it relates to ongoing conversations with community members so that they can be engaged and understand how this investment is in fact being delivered upon in communities that have seen a lack of equity in the past. So I would again echo their comments, but absolutely in the form of equity, because oftentimes the phrase of equity starts off with great intention, but then it doesn't materialize. And so that's what I would want to make sure we're seeing with this recommendation.
Thank you.
This is Elias. I just have one thing to say. Equity, what William just mentioned, and a vision. I just saw a picture from 1980 of our Charlotte downtown this morning. So unless we have that vision and to the Charlotte or the direction for the coming years, we really do not have anything to engage with the communities. So this is very important to have some a vision drafted and get you engaged with the communities. So that's how I see as a future vision or engaging community with this plan.
All right. Are there others? Are they raising their hands? Let me throw out something that's a little bit of a different slant here. Why are we investing in mobility? Is there anyone that would make the point that if we don't do so, we will in fact retrogress as a community? We will fall behind our competitors. We will lose the advantages that we have today in terms of job creation and development, that literally we have no choice as a community but to move forward. If we care about economic development, business development, neighborhood development, if we care about the issues associated with climate change and all those things, it seems to me that we can't not go forward. We must go forward. Is there anybody in the group after 9 meetings that would argue that this effort has been a waste of time, that we're not necessarily going to do anything or need to do anything? I thought that would be the case. I heard nothing, so everybody agrees. Eric, you gave a thumbs up that you shouldn't do anything?
No, I was giving a thumbs up if we do nothing. What you were mentioning, I think is I mean, obviously it might be a little hard to prove that, but I think if you look at what other regions, if we tie it back to our first presentation, what other regions have invested, and you go back and look at their earlier plans and where their current plans are, and you compare them to what Charlotte's previous regional plan looked like, you can see there's such a stark contrast of what projects they're actually working on and the diversity and multimodal options that are already been built and what exists and what they're going to invest in the future. And we don't have that right now currently. And I think if we do, we can see what our future may be, given, looking at what those other cities accomplished and where they are standing right now. And I know I was just looking at, before the meeting started, the Seattle's regional group, and it's the sister of our CRTP, and just looking at all of what they're accomplishing and the list of projects they're looking at, and they just completed their 2050. And it just was kind of inspiring if we could reach that goal of having just that list of diversity of projects, transportation projects. I think we would all be proud, and I think it would advance all of those categories that you mentioned.
Any other comments on why? We've got 3 or 4 good bullets to. Yes. Who am I looking at? That's Kiva. Yes.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, thank you. I'm going to need some help in kind of fleshing out this thought process, but as I mentioned before, this transformational mobility network that we will essentially propose is near perfect complement to the comp plan that is currently being developed and hopefully will be adopted by council in the spring. I believe the impact that is the intent of the comp plan should be listed as one of the reasons why. Stephen, can we go back one slide to the whys? And I believe you listed 10-minute neighborhoods as one of the reasons to identify under section B. But there are quite a few goals of the comp plan that we can list in there. Safe and equitable mobility, I think, is goal number 5 or 6. Tywell, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that this transformational mobility network will be the complement that helps us achieve the impact that we intend to have with the comp plan. And I don't think we have the opportunity to understate that. And that's my comment there.
Yeah, I love what you're saying, because it confirms some of the terminology we used earlier, which was up until this point in time, we really haven't had that North Star with which to align all of our plans and initiatives under. And the comprehensive plan has the opportunity to serve in that capacity. And so, Kiva, I really appreciate you articulated this during our last meeting, this possibility of bringing alignment. I almost want to encourage us to move on to the next section, because there's some recommendations that I think align with that. So with your permission, Mayor, we'll move on to the next section.
Well, Geraldine wants to say
Geraldine.
Oh, no, I just put something in the chat, but for the point of order for the online folks, I just wanted to comment on one of Eric's points about sort of regionalism and looking at our competitors. I think we have a pretty complicated structure of transportation planning organizations in our region. You know, there's lots of players compared to Seattle and Austin and some of the other cities that he cited. So it just really underscores the importance of deliberate coordination and communication that Janet was talking about, like constantly coming back and emphasizing to the community that this is implementing a plan, not, coming out of nowhere. So just a background point, but I agree with everything that's been said. I think there's lots of really great foundation for articulating the why.
All right, Stephen, you want to guide us into what?
I do. So obviously we know what the what is. We've spent several meetings talking about the transformational mobility network. And as I said earlier, it is our response from a transportation perspective to those increasing and changing needs. And we can all examine those networks, but to kind of build on what we've already just heard, I feel like we got lucky when we pulled the slide deck together, because some of the comments are directly in alignment. And so to kind of build on what we just heard from Kiba and from Eric and Ilias, we need something to help guide the what and ensure that if we're going to make the investment, that we're fulfilling commitments to the community, and that we're monitoring our progress, and we're ensuring that every dollar we spend on transportation does as much to advance our community priorities as possible. I mean, that should be an underpinning theme throughout all of this. And it's something that you all have said in different words throughout many of our meetings. But at the end of the day, having something to point to that offers us both the direction, the clarity, and the cover for why we're doing it is incredibly powerful. And that Charlotte Futures Comprehensive Plan clearly comes to fruition and offers us that direction. Let's go ahead and take a look at some of the recommendations that we think maybe fit nicely under the what. And I think you'll find that in some ways they complement recent discussion points. So our first thing is that we should hold ourselves accountable for successfully implementing the program. It sounds elementary, but that feels like a bold statement to me that distinguishes this effort from just a vision plan. It's sometimes easy to calculate the answer. It's more difficult to position yourselves to advance that answer so that we realize the desired outcome. And so if we were to contemplate how would we hold ourselves accountable, what recommended statements might support that? The first one there simply says commit to more and ongoing communication. We already started to hear that from you all. I think we have to both build and maintain community trust and understanding as a part of any future campaign, certainly, but even equally and more important during the actual implementation of the program. The other thing that we're hearing is that we should align this initiative. If we're going to make the investment, we need to align it with other community priorities and other ongoing initiatives. I've just listed a few of them out here, whether that's affordable housing or meeting our environmental goals or ensuring that we don't lose sight of bringing a nexus between our economic development strategy and our transportation strategy. So that alignment seems to be something that we've heard in a variety of formats from different task force members. We also have heard both tonight and in previous meetings that we need to be nimble and dynamic. We need to measure our progress. If we're going to hold ourselves accountable, the only way you do that, right, is to measure things. You only achieve what you measure, that old adage. And we believe that if we look to other communities as a model, that we can learn a few things. And so I love that we had some earlier comments about the comp plan's goals, but we literally can translate those goals into metrics for transportation. And we think that we should, based on the dialogue that we've had to date. And so my first bullet there simply says, define and report metrics that support the goals of the 2040 comprehensive plan. And it pleases me to know that we're hearing some things from you that we've captured in our notes. You've been consistent throughout the process. This last one is communicate progress. And Eric just referenced a moment ago that communities that do this well, they monitor their progress. And if they see changing circumstances, they're not afraid to move in a different direction, to change the design, change the priority. And sometimes that can be complicated, but it's one way to hold yourself accountable to the idea that we're interested more in outcomes than exclusively just building projects. The projects are great, but we're really most interested in the outcomes associated with building and implementing these and bringing synergy between other initiatives. So I just spoke a mouthful. I'm going to pause for a moment. I know that this feels very much so like a stepstone from the previous slides. Let's see if there's anything else that you all might add to that or correct if we've got it not exactly the way you'd like to see it phrased.
Members?
And I promise you that Kiba and I did not coordinate before this meeting.
How about making the transformational, oh, I'm sorry, is that Kiba? Tammy. I'm sorry, Tammy. But that's not Tammy.
It's me, Mayor Gann. I'm here. I'm sorry, I was on mute. And was just sending a note to the group as we look at the alignment section, wondering if we should be deliberate about putting the whole education and school transportation point in there. I think the community would want to know that we're thinking about that.
Can you elaborate a little bit more?
Yeah, you know, if you think about parents, and right now busing is in you know, normal times, let's say that, busing is critical to communities and parents rely on that. Who knows what the future of busing looks like? We may not, but we certainly need to indicate, I think, that we've thought about the future of mass transit for thousands of school children every day in our community, and what, you know, how do we plan to make that work and make that happen? Is it going to require additional funding? You know, I don't know what the future mode of transportation is like when you try to move thousands of kids across the city or whatever, but I think it's worth the community knowing that we've given it some thought. Most people are really wed to how we take care of their children and how they're going to be educated, and that is almost as important as how I'm going to get to work every day.
Maybe I can speak to that because I think I know where Tammy is going with that. We had that comment during our comprehensive plan. We found that there are some students, high school students, who would rather take alternative means of transportation to school and not necessarily school bus or even drive. They want to be able to ride their bicycles if there are protected bike lanes for them or even safe sidewalks for them. They want to be able to take scooters. So it's aligning it with our existing schools transportation network. Where there are gaps, what mobility options can we offer to students? That's exactly. we had that clearly during the comprehensive plan, and that kind of mirrors what she said.
Exactly. And you know, again, if we're looking, and not to belabor the point, but if we're looking as far out as, you know, 2050 and really being to everyone's point, as we've done this work, transformational, would there be I don't know, maybe there are electric school buses coming down the pike or something like that. We just need to be thinking about that as a critical interest of parents in Charlotte, Mecklenburg and beyond. And they've got to vote for this. They've got to pay for it. They're going to want to know.
Very good point, Tammy. Bill?
Thanks, Mayor. I sent a fairly long-winded email to you and Ty and some others.
Yes, you did.
This afternoon. I follow the philosophy sometimes of never use one word when 10 will suffice. But I think as I've listened to what everyone has said throughout our conversations, the issue of helping those amongst us who have problems moving up the economic ladder has been, I would contend, perhaps the central theme. Certainly your issue of being competitive in national and international competition for development and growth. I think Eric has been a great standard bearer for the issue of protecting the environment through this and sustainability. But pretty much everybody has talked about how do we help people? How does this system help people? And so as I look at it, and as I talk to several of the members of the committee, I really think the issue of gentrification and displacement away from areas where we make investment is central to the success of the transportation mobility network as a key element of our transportation and community development. We haven't done a good job. We haven't done any job of incorporating affordable housing in the rapid transit stations that have been created. Even outside the rapid transit corridors, as I look at gentrification, which is occurring throughout our historic neighborhoods, Wilmore, West End, where I live in Pleasant Midwood, and others, you see people being forced out of areas where there is either existing or the opportunity to provide a very rich mix of transportation options. Primarily, I think, because of the integrated street system, interconnected street system that occurred and evolved over time. But if they're forced out of these areas, to where are they being forced? And I don't know. My suspicion is they're being forced to move into areas that are less wealthy in transportation options, probably farther out from the CBD. And if so, that implies that it's going to be even more expensive and environmentally challenging to provide them with options if they move out into the university area or out into Steel Creek or wherever they move to. So, long-winded way of saying that I think that a key element of what we recommend must be a companion policy that mandates that we address as a community the gentrification issue and the displacement out of and away from these investment corridors. So that's, again, I can't think of anything more important than that. Eric was good enough to send me information on what Austin is doing or is about to do in the University of Texas report. That's a good start to see how you can couple the land use and the transportation investments together to help people. So that's my biggest issue. I've got several others, but that's the biggest one.
Bill, I appreciate those comments. And just for the benefit of others who haven't had a chance to read what Bill's referencing, the most recent referendum from Austin wasn't exclusively just transportation, and it certainly wasn't a single mode of transportation. It was multimodal in nature, but they also bundled with it $300 million for affordable housing. That wasn't just money, it was money that came with an expectation that there would be synergies between those investment measures. And so it was kind of interesting to see them go to the voters with a common package in an integrated way. And we'll all be monitoring Austin's progress in that vein. I see that we're capturing some good notes about that. And it seems to reason, Bill, that effectively solutions shouldn't create more problems, right? As we develop plans, that's one of the tenets of good planning, is that we shouldn't inadvertently create other problems if avoidable. And so I appreciate you bringing to light that. And I think that it stands to reason that we need to find the right words to wrap around that subject matter within the recommendations section.
Well, there's a lot to be said for what Austin is trying to do or is going to do. And maybe we need to study and look at that. One of the things I'm concerned about is the way you fund housing and the way you fund transit, and whether or not those can be in the same bond issue for those purposes. I mean, we do know that this community has responded rather generously in the last couple of years in raising funds, both in the public and the private sector, for affordable housing. Can we find a way to use those funds and place those things, that housing, in concert with the comprehensive plan, land use requirements, et cetera? But Austin sets a pattern that I think we need to study, and it needs to be a part of even more. I have Danielle, followed by Kiba, then Ilyas. Danielle?
Thank you, Mayor Gant. I'm backtracking a little bit on the previous slide around the comment that you made. Actually, it was a couple of slides ago. I put it in the comments, but I think Taiwo wanted me to mention it too, though. But it was about what is the opportunity cost if we don't do something. And I'm putting myself putting two hats on, so to speak, being a task force member, but then also being a resident of the community, and thinking about I think what resonates and being able to quantify what are our costs if we don't do this. How do we show the loss of business revenue, business growth, lost wages? These things have a ripple effect and domino effect in other structures and systems. And for many, I think quantifying what the loss is, it's like the census, right? We had a whole campaign around why complete your census and what's at stake, congressional seats and funding for, community support. I think that's the same way as this, is that to communicate that and to be able to quantify that, I think is extremely helpful.
Thank you. And that really belongs more in the why section than it does.
Agreed. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Danielle. Kiba?
Yes, thank you. I was just thinking about the section that we had under measuring progress. I think it was Eric that mentioned in the previous meeting that there could potentially be an advisory board established to help measure and track metrics and progress of the mobility plan. Or this could potentially be added to the charge of a current advisory board or task force. And then secondly, is that a good place possibly to list some of the goal metrics, like mode shift? We talked about mode shift already. And so is that a good opportunity to list some of the mode shift metrics, reduction in emissions, for example, or lowering the percentage of singular occupancy vehicles that are commuting, lowering commute times? Is that a good opportunity to list that section under the measuring progress?
I think it is. It makes sense.
Stephen, let me just ask a question before we go to Ilyas on Kiba's point. The what of this thing, what we're recommending is the transformational mobility network. The metrics associated with that ought to be A, B, C, and D. What do we get out of this? Are we going to get the kind of mode shift that takes 80% of the people who use single occupancy vehicles to move about the community? Can we say with any degree of certainty what that likely might become in 10 years? Can we put metrics of that nature around this network? I'm asking this. This is a question I'm raising.
No, the question is understood. There's clearly metrics that we can generate, that we can monitor over time as a prediction of how well we're doing. If I don't want to mistake what you're saying, though, whether you want us to try to predict in advance what that might be. I think one of just a comment about just measuring progress in general. And many communities think that if you do the plan, that automatically you get the result, right? And if you build it, you get the result. And And I think everyone who just pauses for a moment to think about that realizes that that's not often the case. And so absent bringing alignment between travel demand, which is land use, development, people, jobs, and transportation as a means to move those folks to and from, that's the supply side. If we don't integrate those two together in both how we implement, how we design, and how we coordinate supply and demand, we're probably going to fall short of realizing the fullest potential. We'll see improvement for sure, but we won't leverage to the fullest extent the investment as an asset. And so what I'm hearing from you is let's go ahead and call out metrics that we think might be important to monitor and suggest to council that those get memorialized in some way.
Maybe I can.
I'm a little concerned. Yeah, maybe and maybe not, because I can see some issues here.
Yeah.
That let me put it this way. We're going to present an X billion-dollar plan, which we define as the network. And someone in the campaign to get folks to support this want to know, what am I going to get other than the hassles of construction over that period of time? At the end of the day, what's improved?
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to say, you're going to be within X number of minutes of this system. That is something we can measure. Are we going to be able to say that lots of people who use their cars will now see the benefit of getting on the transit system or the buses or riding their bikes? Are we going to give those kinds? Can we give those kinds of answers?
Yeah, and I'll be very transparent. There are some things that we can measure at this point, which is some of what we shared during our last meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And those are more spatially organized metrics. How far, how many people within proximity, those sorts of things. In terms of likely outcomes, those are things that we can estimate, but those are things that get estimated through a planning process like the strategic mobility plan, because what you should expect from us as we contemplate the creation of the plan itself is that we don't just look at transportation, we look at the influence of transportation on the community indicators that are already articulated in the comprehensive plan, which is something new. We've not done a transportation plan here in Charlotte that has prioritized what influence do those investments have on community indicators. We've done a really great job in years past at measuring how they perform against transportation metrics. And truthfully, that's the new way of doing business, is to look at the influence on the community indicators. So I fall shy of saying we can generate everything, but you should expect that the strategic mobility plan would be generating a wealth of information about likely outcomes associated with the implementation of the transformational mobility network. And that's one of the reasons why we believe it's important to send a message to council that we believe that it's important to develop that strategic mobility plan, and more importantly, to adopt it. Because if it's just academic, if we don't adopt it and operationalize it into policy and prioritization and design.
Yeah, that's really important. So I think we've heard it over and over tonight, that nexus between this work and the comprehensive plan. I think someone said it, the best transportation plans are good land use plans. In the comprehensive plan, we have 4 metrics that we've identified as measures of success, so to speak. Access to job opportunities, access to proximity to amenities, goods and services, and food, grocery stores and all. And then access to, I believe it's housing, affordable housing. And then the 4th metric is environmental justice. And to make sure that are we serving vulnerable communities with this transformation and mobility network, or with whatever we do as part of a comprehensive plan, we believe that those are metrics for equitable growth. And in the comprehensive plan, we've codified those. We've also, in terms of timeline, proposed at this point to take both the comprehensive plan and the strategic mobility plan to council at the same time in April for adoption. So as they're looking at the land use plan, they're also looking at the mobility plan, of which this is a big part, and see where those metrics really match up. So right now in the land use plan, those are the 4 metrics that we believe are what you use for equitable growth. And that environmental justice piece is very critical.
Elias?
Yes, Mayor Gant. I guess Stefan covered the point what I was trying to make. Unless we have that plan or the strategy covering up our future, we are at no point. So that's what I just wanted to highlight while discussing the gentrification and displacement thing. Along with that, it's important to have some planning, some strategy for the city, and that's why it's important to have the plan what we are discussing right now, and that should definitely cover the all the aspects. But just because of the other issues or the concerns what we are seeing, we cannot just say like we cannot do the strategy, or we cannot have any strategy for the development of future. So yeah, just a comment. I guess my point is covered.
Thank you. Are there other comments?
No, that I'm aware of right now. No.
Mayor, this is Janet Labar.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't raise my
Janet?
hand. I just had a question or clarification of something Taiwo just mentioned around the comprehensive plan and this plan being presented to council at the same time in April. So what is the nexus at which those plans overlay? Bill's comments around gentrification and displacement are haunting me a little bit, which is good. This needs to be very thoughtful. And I think as a member of the task force, I would feel much better knowing that there is intentionality in making sure that there's overlay and overlap and integration with that plan, which Taiwo, I know this is probably under all your purview, so this will happen, but I think I just need that assurance to hear that nexus and intersection will happen.
I think we heard it loud and clear tonight that whatever the recommendation looks like to council this December, the whole conversation around protection of mitigating displacement and minimizing gentrification will be part of that. What happens will be that this transformational mobility network must be about the people. If it's about the people, then it has to talk about gentrification and displacement. That will be part of this recommendation from what I'm hearing. However, though, we have to carry it forward. It's already in the comprehensive plan as policies. So it's there right now today. However, we will have to carry it forward in the strategic mobility plan as well, so that both of those documents in terms of land use development and the mobility that goes with it talks about minimizing displacement, minimizing gentrification and mitigating displacement.
I want to add just something because you're bringing up a point where it's one thing to say the words and to have good intentions, but when you go through the traditional steps, what's the outcome? There's some exciting work happening right now because we're not the only community that has experienced this. Obviously, every large growing city has had this displacement issue and they're all grappling with it in their own ways. Two things that I'm aware of, the one we've already mentioned, Austin. Austin literally took their program, it's called Austin in Motion. So they took their plan, they turned it into a capital program. They are using the exact same metrics that they did their planning with to do the capital program with. And I know that might be lost on some, but just a real quick primer. Once you draw a line on the map, you're not done, right? There's a feasibility study, which is the first step in engineering. Then there's going to be a concept design, and then there's going to be all kinds of environmental, and then there's a final design. And then we go build it. What they've effectively done is they said, let's not skip those concerns when we get into the planning and design portion of the capital program. And so places like Columbus, Ohio, which might seem like an odd reference, but Columbus is about to advance their first ever high capacity transit system. Their organization is called Link Us, and they want to get it right. And so they've built a framework that effectively says, as we develop our high capacity mobility corridors, we're not just going to plan for the transportation, we're going to do a housing study with it. We're going to align it with our economic development plan. And so as you're going through the steps of project development, you literally have these requirements so that we're being transparent. We're broadcasting what might be vulnerable about this area as we go through the process, and then bringing resources to try to ensure that we're mitigating those potential threats. So I don't know if that's something that sounds appealing, but those are the kinds of things that we can and maybe should be investigating if we were to advance a program here in Charlotte.
All right. I don't see any other comments before we move to the next piece of this, which is how we fund it. Let me just say this final point on the what. I think it's most important for the citizens of this community to understand very clearly what the plan says or what the plan does in their neighborhood. To understand that in a very rudimentary way. That is, where are the sidewalks? Where are the bike paths in relationship to Plaza Midwood, in relationship to Wesley Heights? And the reason I think that's so important is that citizens have to understand what they're getting before they can support what they will have to fund. And if they see just a bunch of lines on paper with no way to interpret how that influences or will affect their neighborhood, or even to envision how it might affect their neighborhood, then I think we will have lost the chance to communicate and to communicate very well. Now, admittedly, I'm sitting here thinking about the mayor and council adopting what we say and shape it in the way they have to shape it, and then put it out there before the community. And I think we will not have done ourselves. We will not have been fair to the plan and what it can do unless we can explain that plan clearly and citizens begin to understand what it is they are voting for. Okay, let's go to the third section.
All right, if 1 and 2 were easy, I expect the third to be the one that gets a lot of dialogue. And I know that this is a place where it's almost a little uncomfortable because we're talking about large sums of money, but the how clearly is our financial strategy. And we've spent a lot of time talking about the difference between what the task force is responsible for creating, and then ultimately what the manager's office, in conjunction with Kelly Flannery, who's here tonight, in case we have any questions, about a more detailed financial plan, right? That literally deals with the larger contemplations and the trade-offs of how we finance not just this, but everything with our city. And so I want to just a quick reminder of what we agreed are the 3 ingredients for a funding strategy. Let's take a look at those. That we needed to communicate the time and duration of a program. In this case, we've said that particular program is a 10+ year construction timeline that would be financed over 30 years. We also needed to communicate the scale. And in this case, the scale isn't just the number of projects or the length of the projects, but it's also the cost, even more importantly, the cost. And we've communicated that as an $8 to $12 billion program in total. Now, with that, our research has revealed that our local portion is likely around half of that. And I say around primarily because we know that the other half is influenced by partnerships, and those partnerships are largely state and federal. We have experience with those partnerships. Here in Charlotte, we've been very successful. We'd like to think that we'll continue down a successful track, albeit we know that the dollar amounts, the percentages may shift. And then lastly, the funding strategy. If we know time, duration, scale, and amount, we have to be able to identify some likely and logical funding sources that have the potential to generate revenues sufficient to cover at least our local portion. And through that dialogue, we've discussed at length the two primary sources, which would be a transit sales tax, a dedicated property tax, but then the rest of that, as I mentioned earlier, being covered by partnerships. There's also an important piece in there that I think during the last two meetings have really begun to come to bear, which is this observation that we also need to be good stewards of the existing resources that we have access to. That means taking the current CIP dollars and programming them as an integrated portion of this transformational mobility network so that we can ensure that we're bringing about the greatest degree of both efficiency and effectiveness as we move forward. Let's take a look at the next slide. All right, now I promise you no new information. These next two slides are not new. You've seen them before. This is a reminder about what the transit sales tax at varying rates could potentially generate. Just a reminder that this is the one particular funding source that has a specific mode with which it can be used. In other words, we can't spend the transit sales tax on road projects that increase vehicular capacity. That's just, it's not an option. But as you can see, and I'm going to go straight to the middle here, if we looked at 0.5%, we have the potential to generate approximately $110 million annually. And we went through some exercises with you because these numbers, I don't know about you, but when I start seeing all of these zeros and we're talking about hundreds of millions and if not billions of dollars, it becomes a little bit difficult to comprehend what does that mean to me and other Charlotteans. That middle of the road calculation came with an estimation about what the annual average increase might look like. That's at that $90 that you see.
That's $90 to.
Right, and I'm going to read the disclaimer at the bottom there. This is assuming a household income of $60,000, right, which is an average here, with the 30% being assigned, and it's $18,000 essentially. So if you took that rate and you applied it to how much people tend to spend on taxable goods and services, that's generally about 30% of their household income. That equates to $18,000. And if we were to contemplate our current rate at 7.25 and we put an increment on top of that, that means that we currently would be spending like $1,305 annually devoted to this particular program. So this is not new information. This is information that we shared in past meetings. And while I'd love to talk more about it, because you know I love the financing side of this, I also want to push through to get to a couple of other new pieces of information. Before we do that, just a reminder about property tax. Similarly, we brought to you information about what the property tax revenue might generate under different rates. And we offered just a full range between 1 cent and 4 cents. There was a disclaimer down at the bottom there that the city portion calculated on the 2020 median home assessed value of $214,000 with a $2,072 per year property tax bill is where we're getting those increments, the example tax rate. So if you looked at that column to the right, at a 2 cent, for example, it would be $42.96 added annually. If you do the high end of our range of 4 cents, it would be $85.92. All right, so now here's the new piece of information. I'm not going to explain this entire table. There's a lot of information here, but I want to be sure that folks see this. And there's not an answer in what I'm about to share with you. I think we just want to speak to the natural curiosity that we all have, which is how does Charlotte stack up against other communities in North Carolina when we think about the totality of our both tax burden as well as our fees that we might pay. And so Kelly's team has been really helpful at generating some information for us, and they did this research on our behalf. So the 10 other largest cities in North Carolina are represented on this table, and they've identified the current property tax rate for each of those cities, both city and county, to contemplate how we might stack up against them. That's the first tier of that. And so I'm going to read from this, and I hope that you all can see this on screen. And if not, I'm going to try to be as clear with what I share with you at this moment. So the first category is property tax rates. I'm going to get to sales tax and other fees in a moment. But Charlotte right now, using those same assumptions I shared with you earlier, if we assumed an average household assessed value of $215,000, we're essentially generating a revenue from that household of $2,073. Here again, these are big estimates. I was really surprised to see that puts us at the bottom of the other 10 largest cities in North Carolina. We're in pretty close company with our peers, Raleigh and Cary, kind of closing out the bottom end of this range. If you go to places like Wilmington, that same household is over $2,200. If you looked at Durham, it's $2,600. High Point, North Carolina, almost $3,000. So we show this information here again, not to suggest we should be raising our taxes. I think more importantly, when we go through this, what we'll find is I think this is a nice piece of information to help us contemplate, can we afford any additional
Is
revenue?
Raleigh lower than Charlotte right now?
Raleigh's very close. Yeah, they're 2,052. I kind of grouped Charlotte, Raleigh, and Cary is almost identical. They're floating just above $2,000. Everyone else is, if not hundreds, almost several $100s more than us. So that's just one category. So, I mean, when we're thinking about impacts to our households and the revenues that we have to contribute to at the municipal scale, there's other things that come into play. And certainly our sales tax is another. And right now, our local portion of the sales tax is 2.5%. We're in good company once again with the other metro areas in North Carolina. Raleigh and Cary are 2.5%. Durham is 2.75. And so while there are others that are lower, we're right in good company with the other communities that are fast growing urban centers. And then lastly is fees. And I'm just going to point out, we maybe didn't capture every single fee under the sun, but categorically, this is a really nice complete list. It covers things like waste and vehicles, so trash and vehicle fees, wastewater and sewer bills, stormwater fees, vehicle fees, solid waste, recycling. And if you totaled those things up, and I'll tell you that they weren't selective in choosing those just to try to find the things that were lowest at, it was really kind of surprising that we're right there in the middle of all those fees. Some may have guessed that Charlotte would be higher. We're kind of middle of the road. There's only 1, 2, 3, 4 cities that have fees that are lower than us in those 10 other largest cities. So all that being said, that sounds very confusing. At the end of the day, we balance our checkbooks as households, and all of these sum up to things that we write checks for that are going out the door, that we know are our contributions to operating the communities that we live in. If you looked at them in total, Charlotte, there on the left, is $3,636 annually. And I'm just going to fast forward all the way to the right-hand side. High Point, North Carolina is over $4,500. We are the lowest in this list of all the communities. We're in some good company here. Once again, I think that there's some strong characteristics between Charlotte, Raleigh, and Cary. Wilmington's even close, but they start to creep up then. When we look at the triad, over $4,000, The Triangle, areas of Durham, over 4,000, Winston-Salem, 4,000, Greenville, 4,300, Fayetteville, 4,300. So here again, I'm not going to go down through and just kind of read you every single cell from this spreadsheet, but I thought this was an interesting piece of information, Mayor, and it speaks to what you mentioned 2 meetings ago, which was just the observation that we haven't gone back to the voters with an additional sales tax. And how long? It's been 20 years. And so while we always can debate how we utilize locally derived funds, taxes and fees, I think when we look at this table, we can conclude that when compared to our peers, we're being fairly effective, if not efficient, with those fees as a comparison of North Carolina communities. Great point. Great point. So Ty, if you did not hear him, he pointed out that one thing that's unique about Charlotte amongst all those calculations is that we're the only community in North Carolina that's also supporting a light rail system and a streetcar. And so somehow we're finding a way to make that work. And maybe we should take a moment and just reflect on that success. But I thought that was interesting. I hope that that's helpful to our cause. With all that being said, I'd like to maybe fast forward to the same kind of slide that we've had for the other 2 categories. And this is a tough one. And so I need to hear from the task force. Did we get it right? Did we go too far? Did we not go far enough with this recommendation that largely falls in line with our financial strategy? So I'll read the first one. Clearly the supporting statement is commit the resources necessary to achieve the vision. One of the things that we heard throughout this process was we've got good plans. Our problem isn't our plans. We haven't committed the resources to implement the plans on the timeline that our community is expecting them. We put them through a planning process. We do active engagement. We adopt a plan. And then most of us believe that that means that plans will be implemented and implemented within our lifetime. What we're finding out is that the resources simply don't exist to make that possible. So underneath the commit the resources, the first bullet reads, endorse a fully funded transformational mobility network to the tune of $8 to $12 billion with a 50% local funding and 50% partnership with NCDOT and Federal Transit Administration. The second is a communication of that duration. Establish a 10-year investment period. The third is a recognition that there is a step that follows this, and that is develop a detailed financial plan. And we believe that a part of that detailed financial plan is the contemplation of a new transit sales tax to support the program. And we could talk about what that needs to be, but in truth, the financial plan has to find the right number. It needs to calibrate based on a variety of variables. The second supporting bullet says pursue a property tax increase to support the program. The reason it doesn't have a rate next to it, and we can talk more about this, but it largely, the property tax needs to be responsive ultimately to what the sales tax is. These things are intertwined, which is why, once again, I'm reiterating the importance of a detailed financial plan to follow. And then lastly, commit to a fall 2021 Charlotte Moves funding referendum, obviously to provide the support in order to make possible these local funding apparatus. And so with that, I would expect to have a lot of dialogue. I'm anxious to hear comments.
Thank you, Stephen. You said a lot, particularly with that last slide. So let's talk a little bit about committing the resources and capture some additional thoughts with regard to this. I guess the first thing we're really saying is that we want the mayor and the council to commit to their funding the entire local share of what we think the system is going to cost. And that investment period is going to be 10 years to build it, and that's when we're going to put the money in. And we obviously have to develop a detailed financial plan, but there are some parameters that I think you may want to discuss a little bit. A transit sales tax, how big? Well, we don't know how big. Staff is suggesting a half. Well, you're not suggesting, you're putting out a half to a cent additional sales tax. Maybe the property tax needs to be looked at. The third bullet there is something that we know that the city wants to do, is to move to a referendum on whatever way we choose to fund this, to have the citizens vote on it about a year from now. Okay? So, have at it, guys. Elias first, and then Kiba, and then others should get in line. Because I think this is the recommendation that we want clearly included. And I don't know that I want to vote on it or not. Some of you may want us to do that. But let's hear the comments on how you feel we ought to fund this.
Thank you, Mayor Gant and Taiwo. I was mentioning about when we specifically mentioning taxing property and transit. I had this thought of increasing some charges on the water and waste management, and coincidentally I saw that slide Stephen just showed, and I commented just right before that, yes, exactly. So I mean, this will definitely help us out, and like I commented the same thing in our chat discussion, that if we increase water bills and all these items what we have listed here may help us generating some additional revenue. So just a comment or thought on that one.
So let me just make sure I understand your comment. You are saying, Elias, that you would like to see us look at those other services and increase those in order to support this system.
Exactly.
Okay. Kiba?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was wondering, slide number 17, Stephen, or Kelly, would we happen to have any of this data for our peer cities, such as a Nashville or Broward or Austin or Denver, Seattle? Anybody? Do we have any of this data, this comparison of Charlotte versus other peer cities?
We did a little bit of that work earlier, and Kelly, I don't know if you want to comment on that.
Yeah, I think first thing, and we're all a family, but I got to give credit to Strategy and Budget actually put this together, and the city economist, Dr. Tazafor. So
Great.
a lot of work went into this. I want to make sure they get credit for that. Yeah, we did as much as you can, but when you're looking at cities in jurisdictions outside of North Carolina, it's such an apples and oranges game, because I think when we looked at sales tax, rates last time, and we looked at comparable cities, well, do they have an income tax? Do they not have an income tax? And when you start adding all these different fees in, it just becomes so unwieldy, and you're making so many assumptions that the data almost, you can kind of make it be what it needs to be, and it's not a fair picture. So I think we're most comfortable with just focusing on within the state for the real robust ones. I mean, we can try and pull a couple things, but every state is so different, it becomes very difficult.
Thank you for that response, Kelly. I look forward to some robust discussion around these particular points, so I'm going to yield the rest of my time.
All right, let's go to Eric, then Bill, and then Betty.
Sure. Sorry. I was just going to mention maybe adjusting the wording in the actual recommendation to City Council when establishing a 10-year investment period, with maybe the caveat that the projects won't be finished all in the 10-year period. I think just so they have the correct expectations that everything in that whole thing, the transformational mobility network, isn't built in 10 years. So, because I'm sure that'll get posted everywhere in the media and their council. So I think just maybe having that a caveat in there. And then the second was just the financial plan, developing the details in that financial plan, whether we should have like you know, who's doing that? Is there a committee that's, again, mentioning that kind of a committee that is working with the city, putting that together, or like timeline on that? That's just more of a question, I guess, or just making sure that gets obviously finished, right? That would have to be kind of finished in order for the 2021 ballot initiative, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah.
The fact is that the city council will in fact take our recommendations, and there will of course be far more work on exactly whether they will adopt it and how they will go forward with it. I'm not sure that they're going to set up, if I understand you, Eric, there probably won't be another citizens committee that will evaluate. This is probably going to be city council, finance committee of the council, and the city staff and budget folks who will actually come back refining that recommendation based on the other obligations that the city has to deal with, ongoing and future.
Thank you.
Bill?
So this is going to be directed to the issue of sales tax and then partnership with the state. The first is that currently under the state's transportation legislation and the way in which it funds projects, the state doesn't have the capacity to fund its share of the rapid transit investment. So you'd have to look to the legislature to do a special allocation, as was done with the Blue Line. It didn't come out of normal transportation funding. And so that relationship with the General Assembly is going to become crucial to getting their share. Secondly, the sales tax is also, unfortunately, the purview of the General Assembly. And so I suggest to us that if we, and it's also a county-wide tax. And so not just City of Charlotte people, but throughout Mecklenburg County, there's going to have to be support for any increase in the sales tax for transit or any other transportation issue. I think, just based on my knowledge of what's going on in the rest of the county, the idea of just doing a sales tax for purely transit may not fare as well as if that sales tax increment could be used on, say, for example, bicycle and pedestrian projects or some local projects that would give to the point where we're trying to make sure that throughout Charlotte, we're spreading the money around in communities. You have that same accommodation countywide. So I would suggest to that it might not be just a transit sales tax, but a transportation sales tax.
Thank you. Let me make this point because someone, I don't know, was it you, Bill, that sent the email talking about the issues of state involvement and how much they might be able to provide in this funding this network? Not sure you were. Was Bill. I think as a task force, Bill, I was just raising the question whether you were the person that sent us the email regarding the ups and downs of the fuzziness of state funding and whether or not that might be available to us. It was a legitimate point. I guess you're making it again. I would argue only that right now our recommendation to the council is how to fund the local share. If we fund the local share, that is an issue they've got to deal with. And even as a part of funding the local share, we're clearly going to ask the council will have to get enabling legislation from the General Assembly just to make that addition. But I want our concerns tonight on funding to stick with the local share because we really don't know what the situation is going to be with regard to federal funding. whether it's going to be 30%, 40%, or 50%. But what we want to try to do is say to the council that we recommend that you do these kinds of things to raise the $4 to $6 billion we suggest this thing is going to cost.
Can I say something quickly?
Yes.
So just to respond to that as well, Bill, and I don't know how many of you are aware of this, but Council accepted the recommendation of the Intergovernmental Relations Committee earlier this month to make mobility a priority legislative agenda that goes to the state. In other words, making the recommendation of this task force a priority on our legislative agenda. And over the last several weeks, including today, we've been having dialogue. So you're right, it definitely involves a lot of conversation, communication, partnership with the state. We've been having that for the last several weeks, pre-election and even today. And we're going to continue to have that over the next several weeks, probably even prior to your December 3rd meeting as well. We will be meeting with our leaders at the state level, having this conversation. So you're so right on. It's about partnership. It's about making sure that we continue to build the relationship that we have there.
All right.
If I may, one follow-up. I appreciate what both of you have had to say. Truly, I do. What I am suggesting is that if this sales tax increment can be used for more than just transit, I think you may find those partnerships to be more willing.
I think that's a good suggestion. The fact that it's not just transit may be an idea we want to consider. Let's see, the next person is Betty.
Thank you, Mayor. And Bill hit several of the issues I was going to mention, but I think that including the property tax as a source is something we haven't done in my recollection for transportation mobility. But since this plan includes a lot of things that are not just roads and transit, but they include, things that you would need for right-of-ways or such, that the property tax does make a lot of sense. It also helps show that we're not just going to the sales tax, which is a regressive tax. And I just think there's some, not putting it all on the sales tax has some advantages.
Thank you. I think you've got a point there, Betty.
Mayor, if I also would say is that when a couple of meetings ago, when you said that a portion of this was going to be funded through what we were already doing in the CIP, that really made this so much more doable to me. So if you take the CIP and then you take, and I know we're talking about the local piece, but the fact that the CIP contributes to this, it's almost like it's a source of funding, just like the sales tax or just like the property tax.
Yeah, and Betty, I didn't capture that in those original notes, so I'm glad Ed's writing that down now, because both you and I think Ken, May, and even Jim have been a good sounding board for being sure that we're being good stewards of those existing resources. So I think it's totally appropriate to nest that with these other funding sources to put the expectation in there that there is an integration of existing CIP with the program. And it should follow the same tenets, priorities, goals as the remainder of the program.
Before I go to the next speaker, there are some folks on the task force that have not offered any opinions. I'm not sure whether or not they're just in agreement with everything we're saying, or they don't have a single thought that they thought would add value to this discussion. but I hope you feel free to speak up. Kiba, you're next in line. Kiba?
Mr. Mayor, I didn't have my hand up, but I just put a comment in the chat that to Bill's point, instead of using the word transportation tax, maybe, or I'm sorry, instead of using the word transit tax, transportation tax, I think is what he suggested, and I threw out the term mobility tax. I'm not even sure if that would fly, but that's just a comment that I made in the chat.
Yeah, I think the point that both of you are making is that maybe this next increment on the sales tax ought not be limited just to rapid transit, or transit, but transportation in general. I would be interested, however, in finding out in our existing CIP funding, how much of that is already addressed. I think we raised that question the last time, Kelly, for sidewalk improvements and other kinds of things that are not.
Yeah, I'm not sure if we put it in this deck again and blew by it, but I think the number we had was 500 million over the 10-year period.
So there is $500 million of this $4 to $6 billion that's provided currently in the CIP.
Yeah, currently supported by property tax.
Okay.
That's just the city portion. It doesn't contemplate any participation from the county. Obviously, they currently fund greenways. I think the expectation is they will continue to, so there would probably be some dollars to contribute there as well.
Okay.
Maybe I can respond to this. Sorry, go on.
I'm sorry, Kiba.
Hello.
I think that's Sonia.
Sonia?
That's Sonia. I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm in the car.
I was wondering
but anyway, but anyway, I want to piggyback on what Kiba just said about the usage of the word mobility. In our last meeting, I thought about that word, and when I think about mobility, when I think about mobility, I'm not in my mind. I'm thinking that we could really bring this home to bear in PSAs when we're putting this out there to the public, so they'll see it and feel it and want to make it happen. But when I think about the word mobility, I'm not thinking in terms of, only in terms of getting from point A to point B physically, but I'm thinking about upward mobility as a part of the conversation when it comes to my standard of living. And I know early in our earlier meetings, we talked about Charlotte being like at the bottom of the list as far as upward mobility. And so when I think about mobility tax, or just using that verbiage, maybe in the term as far as PSAs, or even as just the conversation in general, mobility tax, we're talking about, like I said, I'm reiterating, but just I'm trying to paint a picture here, but just not getting from point A to point B, like on a bicycle or whatever. That's included, but mobility as far as upward mobility, financial, social, all kind of ways that our lives are going to be impacted, affected by this particular project, this big project that we're putting forth. It's going to affect our quality of life. It's just, so when I think about that word, that's what we're kind of swing back around to what Kiba talked about in suggesting that we call it a mobility tax, because it's more than transportation. It's a way of life that we're talking about impacting. I just wanted to say that.
Thanks, Sonia. That's an interesting insight. Eric?
Thank you. I'll be quick. It's just to maybe add to the CIP funding to maybe that we recommend and encourage, that the county would help out too. And maybe the wording, I guess this CIP funding integration would actually occur in the strategic mobility plan, correct? And maybe just adding that wording in into that so that our recommendation clearly states where that should happen or where it could be locked in so it actually gets used.
Thank you, Eric. Ernie?
Thank you, Mayor. I've been one of the silent ones because I do agree with most of what everybody has said tonight. I think there's been great discussion around it. I will say that I keep coming back from a larger picture standpoint to think about how we're at an opportunity as a community where we can go big or we can try to bite off little bites and chews or whatever. And I think in any situation like this, historically, Charlotte, I think, has chosen to really go big and try to do things that can impact the community in a larger way. And so if we had to vote on it, I would vote, let's go as big as we can, and then we'll work it out, all the details later on. But the important part of that is, and Sonia hit on it a minute ago, and a couple other people did as well, maybe Bill and you, is the way that it's articulated and messaged to people is really critical. And I think the whole narrative around the equity and trying to get our community, make our community better for everybody is just so right on point right now, and I think will always be. And the opportunity for us to merge that discussion with what we're trying to do here with the transformational mobility network makes so much sense that I would urge us to really focus on simplifying that message around that part of it, because I don't think there's anybody in the community that would argue against it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ernie. Nick?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Probably one thing I would be curious to add is going back to the sales tax. I believe, if I remember from our meeting last week, that we collect about $30 million from the fare box that CATS does. Is Kelly still in the room from the?
Yeah, I think that's right. Sorry, I'm going through my notes. If we're only collecting about 30 million from the fare box and a 0.25% sales tax increase, I believe on the other slide was about 55 million. I think it would be a radical and one of the transformational shifts if we go for an ask or go back to the public and replace the fare box revenue with more of a sales tax revenue. So it's a shared responsibility among our community that we don't offer our transit system to just the people that put money in the fare box, but the cost is shared among all the people that live here. I think that could go a long way of kind of redefining how we look at transit, that we're all in it together, not just the people who use it on a day-to-day basis. And I think that could also go a long way to improving some of our economic mobility or upward mobility efforts. Since we're no longer charging those people for transit, that could go to other uses in their household as well.
So you're saying no charge to ride the system?
For certain services, maybe that's bus and maybe that's rail, but maybe more premium services, there still is a fee, but maybe those more routine services that we offer, such as a local bus or a community bus, could be covered by a sales tax, which could go a long way to helping for upward mobility in our community and encouraging more use of the system if we remove cost as a barrier.
Interesting. Very interesting.
Nick, we're capturing that, and I'm just going to use some just planner terminology, but that fare-free ridership for citizens, essentially, that are contributing to it. So it's not really free; it's that they've already paid for it, right? Is part of that message there, and there is a lot of evidence out there for systems that have experimented with this, either on select lines or as a system as a whole. So it's a really interesting concept. Obviously, it's not something we get to make a decision about, but it's nice, I think, to add something like what Nick's referencing as something to contemplate as we're developing the financial plan, because it could become part of the goal or part of the campaign.
I think it's a great idea. Kelly is looking at me like I'm crazy, but I actually think it's a great idea. if we ask citizens to pay another 50 cents in a transportation tax or mobility tax, however you want to define it, and it raises over 30 years almost $4 billion, then why not make the system itself free? You know, of course, the transit people will tell me why they shouldn't or should. But my point is, it certainly reduces the regressiveness of the sales tax if low-income citizens can access that because they're already paying for it in the sales tax that they pay for other purchases.
So
Yeah, I mean,
I'm just going to give you numbers. I'm not opining. I'm just giving you numbers. So the 0.5 cent increase will get you 110 million annually, or 3.3 billion over the 30-year period. So 110 a year, and then you're going to need to add 30 to it because you're taking away any fare box revenue. So you need to 140 now. So for 140, that's probably closer to 0.75% increase.
But you know, I always figured that my sense, Kelly, is that the community is also going to grow. And those revenues you're projecting today does not take into account the growth in the sales tax at that point. So
what Kelly is saying is that why don't you make the sales tax years $140 million a year for 30 years to generate? That would be an increase of 5 cents over the 7.25.
Yeah, you got to solve for the 30 you'd be taking away. So
your mic's not on.
So I said what Kelly is saying in essence is,
again, Kelly was not opining. She was just giving numbers.
Yeah, just throwing out numbers essentially and saying, instead of the 30 million, why don't you just increase the 7.25 we have today by 75 cents?
It would be somewhere between
that
0.5, 0.75 to make up for the 30.
But that would be just for the sales tax. And then there will still be, and so if we do that, and John, I don't know if John is online, but there are it's not just about fare free. There are other reasons sometimes why transit agencies don't do free fares. But I do get that point as to if you increase sales tax on one hand and you make fares free on certain services, maybe not all of them, you are able to achieve that equity and upward mobility goals. So that's definitely something
again, that 0.5 cent gets you 3.3 billion. We're trying to solve for between 4 and 6, and there will be growth. So maybe that 3.3 becomes 4, but it ain't gonna become 6. And then you're gonna add another 30 on top of it every year.
I think what we're concluding though is that that's something that gets explored during the financial plan, the detailed financial plan, and it's not a binary thing, right? It could be that there's a portion of revenue that's set aside to create a program for which you're eligible for. Maybe it's not the entirety. So there's lots of ways with which you could embrace the spirit of that without it being an all or nothing sort of approach.
But I like the notion that we ought to have in our recommendation, council ought to explore a fare-free ridership as a part of the covering of this cost, and that there may be some arrangements that we obviously can't think of space of time we have tonight to do that might be looked at.
Yeah, and I think Steve touched on an important point is the financing plan is as much of a program as the rest of this is, and it will be dynamic and it will be nimble. And this is back of the envelope. We know where we need to get, but until we get the specific costs per project and construction timelines, we really can't dig that far into it. So we just have to remain flexible.
But I will also quickly say something though, because I've had that said a few times tonight. So this is really more of an information from a non-financial expert. But the fact is that we did have certain guiding principles coming into this. And I don't know if it was Chris or Dave who said this at the very beginning. Watching the city's financial health is also very critical. And so if we end up using sales tax to do something other than transit, that may impact the city's bond ratings and their financial health. And so we need to really be mindful of that and be very really thoughtful about that. So it's not like it cannot be done, but then we have to think about the city's financial health as an organization. So something to keep in mind. But as well as thinking about how can we do this if we break it down into not just annual, but what that translates to on a month-by-month basis. If you increase something by $90 annually, or you increase it by $42 annually, what does that really look like on a month-by-month basis? I don't have the information in front of you today, but we did a focus group polling last week where we threw out all these questions. What's people's appetites for a $4 to $6 billion locally? What does it mean if you pay this much in sales tax, or if you pay this much in property tax? Hopefully I'll have that information for you before we get to December 3rd, but very interesting responses from the community. Actually, there was not a lot of pushback, and people kept on saying progress costs money. We know that if you have a network like this, it's going to result in so much expense. So if it's not going to be so much more, we're willing to support it. So there are things out there that I totally agree with Ernie. It's really how this is messaged and how this is put together at the end of the day.
Okay. Are there other comments from any of the members? This has been a robust discussion so far. Anybody else wants to talk about funding strategy? Yes.
Mr. Mayor, David Ward here, and I love that we ended. I probably just should have not said anything. I love what Taiwo said. I think that was a perfect ending to this. I think so much of this is going to be messaging, and there's so much compelling stuff that we're talking about, and so much that can benefit our community and the individual members of our community. We just have to make it relevant to them and help them understand what they're paying for in this, property tax increase and in the sales tax, and that. I think that direct connection, particularly Taiwo, if the results of your focus group are as optimistic as you indicate they might be, I think you set yourself up for success here.
All right, let me get to a sort of closing this out a little bit. Do we have? I'll get to the public comments in a minute. I've been going back and forth with the staff on the notion that the task force ought to recommend more specifically to the council the strategy for funding. And that is to say, rather than arrange, that we think it's a good idea to suggest a 50-cent increase in the transit tax, or if we want to call it something else, a 50 cents increase in the sales tax to be used generally for transportation, a 1 cent increase in the property tax to be invested in transportation or mobility, and that those two things might generate X amount of revenue over a period of time. Or if you don't like that notion, if you're comfortable with what I see on the screen, or what has been suggested, is that we simply say you choose between a sales tax and a property tax, and you all decide. That you all being the city council and the mayor. I went with the notion that when we got the charge, the mayor really wanted us to come back after studying this, perhaps more than any other group of citizens in this community, to say we need to raise between $4 and $6 billion for investments we will make over the next 10 plus years. And the way we would suggest that you explore is to explore a 1/2 cent sales tax, or a 1 penny sales tax, or 1/4 penny sales tax, or a 2 cent property tax to underwrite the complete funding of this transformational mobility network. And I wanted to see that kind of specificity. But I'm not sure whether you want to see that kind of specificity as a task force. So I'm putting that out there to see whether or not you want it to be more specific or you simply want to be general in terms of what you send back to the city council.
Hey, Mayor Gant, could I offer a third option?
Yes.
That I think might scratch your itch a little bit. What about the concept of a sales tax within a range and a property tax within a range?
I think that's what Stephen put up on the board.
Yeah, a little tighter range than those giant numbers, but perhaps not as specific, but also not one or the other.
Okay. Or is that to say that the range might be a quarter to 50 cents? Or I mean, quarter to a half cent as the range you're speaking of and what it raises?
I think you got to go a little higher. I think you're looking at 50, because 50 cents gets you 3.3 billion. So,
okay, 50 cents to $1.
I mean, yeah.
And what are you going to say about the property tax?
I mean, I don't want to lead the witness, but
I'll suggest before you say anything, Kelly, I'll suggest that if you go high on the sales tax, you go low on the property tax.
Because you already got $500,000 coming out of the property tax and the
yeah, and
kind
I've
of
been
CIP.
struggling for the last hour about the comment about making the transit tax more encompassing. And I'm usually pretty good at trying to bring it down and not making it really technical. I'm really struggling with this one, but I think Ty got as close as we can get. Is it does put financial constraints on the city because of the pledge of the security, which is really technical and trying to avoid that. But
well, let me ask this question. If you stuck with the sales tax as being primarily for transit,
which is where most of the cost is going to be
right
at the end of the day anyway.
And the property tax, the mobility property tax piece that you're going to assign to mobility or transportation at a penny or so, what kind of revenues would that raise?
So if we're looking at the half and we get 3.3, I mean, we still don't know the break between how much is transit and how much is mobility. But let's say transit's 75%. I'm looking at it, I don't know, of that 4 to 6 number. Does that seem right-ish? So maybe higher than 75?
That 75 cents is going to be more than.
Oh, yeah, it would be. Because you've got 50 cents at 110 and one at 220. So I think 75 would be around 140, which would generate probably $5.some billion.
Yeah, I think that's fine. I just.
Well, let me go back to the task force. I'm wondering whether or not we allow the staff to do some study on that. And in the December 3rd meeting, would you be willing to vote on a specific recommendation to give to council with regard to the amount of sales tax and or the amount of property tax within those ranges? And I think I would ask the staff to send some alternatives out to the task force to look at.
That's quick math. We could run that and maybe even include it in the draft that you plan on circulating. I think you said before the holiday, Stephen. Is that your goal?
While y'all do that, Kiba and Eric wanted to make some comments on my, I guess you wanted to make some comments. I don't know what you want to make it on. Kiba?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. I was just going to suggest that I was kind of enjoying the flexibility of how Stephen already had it worded. However, to possibly strike a balance between what you're strongly suggesting and what Kelly might be suggesting is to keep some flexibility, but narrow it down to 1 or 2 options or 2 or 3 options on how to achieve that 4 to 6. And I think Kelly just made a comment to that regard in terms of putting together something that we can look at in terms of a package to present. but maybe presenting to council maybe 2 ways to get to 4 to 6. But I think pigeonholing to a certain extent, I don't know how well that might fly over with council, but having a flexible way for them to get there might be, is certainly something that I would encourage. And then secondly, I just want to add to the comment about the sales tax that I can't remember who made the comment about this in our last meeting about maybe not having the increase apply to necessities like groceries, like the food tax, for instance. So maybe not having the increase apply to things of that nature. So that was my comment.
Thank you, Kiva. Eric, and then Ken.
I was just going to, make a comment similar to that. I like maybe presenting a table, because I mean, you could mix and match a little bit if you're increasing the sales tax a little bit, and then, the property tax has to go down. I think there's a couple ways of getting there, but seeing it clearly how that pans out in a nice clean table, but also maybe including, the pros and cons to it, right? So you can easily see what, if it's regressive, this is going to be, hurt more folks this way if you have a higher sales tax, and then also the city's ratings, just kind of laying it out, the pros and cons of each of those different things. And you could do it, keeping the wide open area of, half a cent sales to a cent, and then, the pros and cons of that mixture with right next to it being the property tax and how that would have to increase in order to make up for the lower sales tax, vice versa, so you could kind of see it, and then those combinations equaling what we need to do. I mean, it could be that expansive, or it could be a little bit more focused, as Kiba suggested, of having maybe 2 to 3 options of how you get to that $4 to $6 billion.
Thank you, Eric. Ken?
Thank you, Mayor. As you know, I sent you my comments earlier today, and I've been quiet today because I don't want to be a fly in the ointment among some great transportation enthusiasts, and I'm one of them. But I just think we've been looking at this in a vacuum and as a microcosm of a very large city budget and county budget. There's other partners to consider. And looking at our recent history as to, referendum on taxes that didn't go through, and how do we sell this one? When we did reevaluation, the city kept the property tax rate at the same level. The county, without referendum, of course, was able to, with referendum, it's an easier process, add a couple pennies to their tax base. And they're a big part of this, and we haven't kind of engaged the county as to, what that participation may be. My concern is that the city has a number of unfunded liabilities right now that the general public probably is not aware of. We have some infrastructure issues that are not funded in terms of water and sewer deterioration that need to be fixed over a number of years. We have some unfunded liability in terms of, pension and health for employees. And I have a concern that with the COVID deficit that we're going to incur in our annual revenue, that there may be some priorities that come up. And so I guess I would make a recommendation that maybe at our December 3rd meeting that we have the chairman of the budget committee or the city manager or whatever, come and kind of give us a sense for what the budget process is looking like for Charlotte, and help us in letting us make a recommendation on how we do this. They're going to put a referendum on the 2021 ballot already to, change the compensation of city council, change the limits, add term limits, change the districts. That's going to be very controversial. We can look at this in a vacuum, but all those things are going to play into how this gets sold and presented to the general public. So that's my recommendation, is that we have somebody come and help us understand better what the city budget looks like going forward.
All right, thank you, Ken. Geraldine? Geraldine?
Sorry, Mr. Mayor. Yep, I'm here. I just put something in the chat about maybe looking at some other models. There are a lot of communities that are increasing fees and taxes on vehicles as a way to fund bike and pedestrian infrastructure. So I don't know if that's something that has been looked at or if that's feasible. Obviously, transit is the big elephant in the room, and it's the one that takes the most resources. So I think, and it's the one, frankly, that requires the match for any federal dollars. So I think we need to keep that in mind as well, that if we're going to go for large transit investments, we need large matching funds available in local dollars to support that. And so I think that's where it gets a little tricky. I like the suggestions of calling it a mobility tax instead of a transit tax, but at the end of the day, you have to make sure that you can provide those matching funds if you're going for federal dollars. And it might get really complicated and really political if you're not able to achieve that in the applications to the federal government. So just something to be aware of.
Very good observation.
So, you want to say something? Go ahead.
Well, I would just, in the interest of time, I was just thank you for the reminder. In the interest of time, I just wanted to respond to a couple things that we're hearing. We've been transparent all along. I think one of the things I wanted to be reflexive of is just kind of the contemplation of putting more options out there. And we've been trying to do our best to be responsive to the timelines that are established. And I think one of the things that we've got to keep our eye on is our commitment to deliver to council in December. And so our plan was to use the materials we got tonight, which I would offer is really good stuff. I mean, I'm feeling confident about where we're getting some inflection in the recommendations. And I feel like there's ways with which we can capture and memorialize that really well. I do have a little bit of concern if we maybe think about creating some more choices and kind of continuing down a path on things that, quite frankly, I'm not sure we have direct influence over. But what I wanted to offer was, is there a way with which we could take what we've got tonight and allow us to take a good stab at compartmentalizing this into a report on your behalf? And I know it's not going to be 100%, but maybe we're 85%. And maybe we allow us to bring that back to you and discuss it in December. And within that report, let's dial in to what Kelly was saying, and kind of it's the hybrid between what I'm hearing in terms of the financial recommendation. Maybe let's put a range on there that's very specific for the sales tax, and a range for property tax, and a few caveats. If, like you heard earlier, if you end up going big on sales tax, you go small on property, and also put some caveats in there about sales tax. Do what you can to minimize the regressive nature of it. But if we could go that route, what we can continue to commit to is delivering a report by Thanksgiving, and then use December 3rd potentially to just contemplate what other messages on top of the report do we need to convey to council, whether those are verbalized or whether they're addendums to or edits to that report. I just wanted to put that on the table. I want to be respectful of the schedule that was established.
I support what you just said, Stephen. I think that's a good idea. We've had some very good notes here from the group. Bottom line, I do think that council, the mayor, will appreciate the work we've put into the why and then the how. And I think they will appreciate even more that this group has looked at the best way or the directions we ought to go in funding this thing. What I was more concerned about is not simply throwing out, well, you guys look at the sales tax or look at the property tax and that's how you're going to fund it. They knew that back in February. But to have thought about how we might fund it and what we might ask them to look at in trying to come up with the $4 to $6 billion makes some sense. Ken, the suggestion that we bring in the budget director or someone to look at this thing, I'm not sure that's what the mayor wanted us to look at. Because what we do is we start to take on those other issues, and admittedly, we are a little bit myopic in terms of looking just at mobility. But I guess that's what it is. The council has to weigh those other priorities that they have to deal with in light of our recommendations. So while I appreciate that suggestion, I'm not sure that I would want to call the budget supervisor in or the head of the committee. I don't want to get any more into their business. We understand the issues of the sales tax and how it's been used in this community, and I think we're on the right track with that vehicle, and the property tax as we've used it for our capital improvement programs. Well, thank you all for a great discussion. The Hornets have already drafted their player. I don't know who it is yet. I probably don't want to know before this meeting is over, but we have a public comment portion, and I want to ask Taiwo to read some of those comments that have come in.
Sorry, Mayor, I just found that Kiba had a hand up, so I don't know if.
Oh, I'm sorry. Kiba, I'm sorry.
And then I'll read it.
You had a final word?
Yes, thank you. I was wondering, I too am concerned with presenting too many options to council. Also respecting, as Stephen said, the schedule that we're trying to adhere to. Is it possible that the task force at our next meeting, or again, being respectful of the bandwidth of staff and Stephen, but is there a way that the task force can possibly see an option that splits transit from the other funding priorities? Whether it be a survey of some sort that we can kind of explore in between meetings between now and December 3rd, or at that December 3rd.
What do you mean split transit from the other priorities?
Geraldine's point is a big piece, and that's where the matching is required and things of that nature. And in remembering some of the comments that Carl, I believe, has pointed out, and maybe attacking some low-lying fruit, in the interest of just seeing what that looks like, is it worth seeing an option that we can present as maybe as to Eric's point, kind of like a buffet or a table that takes out the rapid transit or rail from the other priorities in the strategic mobility plan?
Well, first of all, we got to the 8 to 12 billion by cost estimates on those various systems.
All of them, yes.
So we should know exactly what those, well, not exactly, but the estimates are given to get to. Did we ever have that enumerated? I think you all came back and simply said it would cost 8 to 12, but nobody said sidewalks is 500,000 or 500 million.
Yeah.
Would that give them some more information?
It would. Kiba, my one concern with that, just to be clear, is one of the things that we learned together through this journey was the importance of an integrated system, and that a single mode doesn't fulfill and does not realize its fullest potential if it's not complemented synergistically with the other modes. And so I'm not hearing from you, take it out and don't do it. Well, I think what I heard was maybe contemplate, like from a financial funding strategy, that might be something to look at. I just want to clarify, were you speaking about it from the funding and financing perspective?
Yes, so.
Okay, so in that scenario, I think one of the things that I might offer just as counsel here is that maybe think about that as a recommendation for developing an effective campaign. And because the financial plan will be the financial plan. right? And it will have dedicated funding streams associated with the requisite modes that are populated within the transformational mobility network. But I heard from not just you, Kiba, but from others tonight, at least 3 others. I was taking notes, and I apologize, I don't have your names handy. I'm typically really good at that. But I kept finding thematically that all of you were saying very similar things, that we need to run an effective campaign. And I know that sounds really elementary, but it's not written down anywhere. And the truth be told is that this staff can't run the campaign, right? They can't be a part of the campaign. But what you might want to do is to send a message that through the planning process, that we generate content that has all the appropriate messaging to make this relevant to the broad variety of constituents with which it's intended to serve. I don't know if that helps in response to it, because I think you're bringing up a good point, but I think it has more to do with the campaign and the financial plan than the task force deliverable.
And those comments are definitely accepted. And I'll tell you where the origin of that thought process came from is what Austin did in splitting their 2 referendums. So in terms of presenting it to the public, making it more palatable, if we as a task force can see that, not necessarily that we may present that to council, but just to see that from our perspective.
Thank you, Kiba.
Kiba, I appreciate that comment. We're going to have some folks look into, just for our own knowledge, whether that's part of our deliverable or not, whether or not we can even do that in North Carolina, because it's an elegant solution to a complicated problem. Austin did bundle, the 2 things they did bundle was transit and housing together. And then there was everything else on the second proposition. So there's a model. We're not sure if we're able to do that here, but it's worth looking into. And when council asks that question of us, we probably should have the answer. Appreciate that.
Okay.
All right.
Well, thank you. So I've got the comments, but I'll start with a comment by Bill that was on the chat box, and that is Bill Cox said, as a suggestion on a mobility tax, there will need to be a clear line of how much is devoted to transit and how much to other modes. As a start, I suggest half cent for transit and a quarter cent for others. So that's from Bill. From Maddie Marshall, Miss Maddie Marshall, who was listening in, our first question is, how do we fund it? What are we getting? Explaining to the citizens. Key points in this financial strategy. Cannot support or commit to a fall 2021 Charlotte Most recommendation without inclusion of phase 3 gold line, links gold line. Is this included? The answer is yes, Ms. Marshall. Second comment, the why we're investing in transportation mobility is, number 1, address the systemic racism, injustice, and inequalities. Number 2, upward mobility. Number 3, honor the recommendations of the Streetcar City Links Advisory Committee and complete the phase 3 of the City Links Gold Line. Transportation is the economic engine that would drive the continued growth of this phase 3 Gold Line. Ms. Marshall, again, we will find a way to address the housing and transportation bond issues. Put the projected cost on the ballot and the voters will decide. Then another set of comments from Ms. Christine Danis. Please consider near-term, mid-term, and long-term metrics. Also, because a truly transformed mobility network strives to recognize and overcome the limited investment of the past, the divisiveness of auto-dependency, and will lift up a change here and now for our future where all have equitable access to housing, work, play, and quality of life. Be bold, continue to build community trust and understanding in the 21st century is a must. She also said, we suggest avoiding property tax versus motor vehicle tax. Ms. Erica Nelson, how can we as citizens get involved? Hopefully that was clear tonight. And the last comment by Mr. Ron Ross is to provide ongoing educational resources and financial incentives to encourage utilization of alternative modes of transportation. I will quickly end this with this before I give this back to Mayor Gann. 2 of our members have lost family members in the last few weeks. I don't necessarily want to call out their names. So I will, if you will I will send out an email just to let you know. So if you will reach out to them to just encourage them over the next few days, we'll appreciate it. Members of the task force, I've lost family members in the last few weeks. I just wanted to share that. But thank you very much for being with us tonight, Mayor.
Okay. Well, again, I want to thank the task force for their attention and to their involvement in tonight's discussion. We have one meeting left on that 3rd of December. Next week, Taiwo will be sending a draft of the task force report before Thanksgiving for your review before our last meeting. We will use our final meeting together to confirm our recommendations, invite public comment, and celebrate a little bit. I don't know how we will do that, but celebrate the completion of our work. Taiwo will send out more information regarding logistics for the next meeting. And I look forward to seeing you then, and have a happy and safe Thanksgiving. Remember, mask, socially distance, and washing your hands, and not eating too much turkey. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Night.
Good evening.